I want to talk to you about portfolio distilling, and if you don't know what it is, I fully understand. I'm just beginning, but by the end of my presentation I hope you do. Local production, global reach. But first of all, who am I? My name is Odin. I'm the founder of iStill, and my company helps set up around 200 distilleries per year. We do some contract distilling, not really big, but for some customers. We do a lot of product development, 50-60 products per year. We do training in our university, and we sell a lot of distilling equipment. And the reason why we do that, or the reason why I entered the industry, is when I took a first look at the industry, I saw two hurdles basically in the way of you guys, or your predecessors, like 10 years ago, of becoming successful craft distillers. When I looked at what was happening and going on, I first of all saw that a lot of the equipment you could buy was very expensive and relatively outdated, tailored for big alcohol, even though most craft distillers don't have the deepest pockets to actually acquire that equipment to make craft distilled products. The second problem I encountered, and personally because I had to learn a lot too when I started out, is that there is not a common body of knowledge or experience around. There is now, but there wasn't in the past. Some people knew something, but nobody knew everything. The knowledge that was available was fractionated and mostly anecdotal in nature. So why did I start iStill? Why do we sponsor this event? Well, because we want to help participate in getting all the knowledge and all the experience over to you guys, so you can become successful award-winning gin producers or whiskey producers or rum producers or whatever you feel like making. What we help do, or try to help do on a daily basis, is innovate craft distilling equipment. We started that some 7-8 years ago in order to make production prices lower, and also for you to be able to actually make a product on a repetitive basis. One of the challenges as a craft distiller is, or used to be, that you're doing relatively small batches. So it's very difficult to gain control over the taste profile of those smaller batches. We installed a lot of innovations in our machinery to actually help get there with 0.1% variance. Get the same product over again and again. And when we were getting traction with iStill, I started up the iStill University to gather all the information that we'd found, and we now share that with all the distillers that are willing to fly over to Amsterdam for a few days of fun, distilling, learning and experiencing. And there's a few people here that have been there, and if you need more information, we just want you guys to be successful. Equipment is important, but knowing what you're doing, what you're heading into, is as important as well. So if I look at the status quo in craft distilling, what I see right now is there's control over distillation, even more so than a lot of the big alcohol producers have. And the production prices are going down, so we're very efficient at making good booze. Yet if I look at what we actually do, the impact we have, and I don't want to be harassing you guys, because yes, you do have an impact and you are important and your ideas are amazing, but what do we do on the shelf? How much percentage do we actually gain? You can see that we're trailing behind a little bit. We're not really closing the gap with, for instance, craft beer. We do have a market share, but relative to big alcohol, we're not a big threat yet. Now my presentation, I hope, will help change that. I think we should go after big alcohol like craft beer went after big beer. Now they took over the shelf over there. If you guys do the same, maybe we can make a contribution in getting you there. So if you look at craft beer, it's ahead of the craft distilling growth curve. That makes sense. They started earlier. We're not really catching up, even though technologically we can make amazing spirits repeatedly at relatively low cost points. So with technicality solved, what's holding us back in actually taking over the shelf, in taking over the whole industry? When I talk to my customers, and we've got 600 out there, what I get back, and I try to summarize it, is basically two things. It's quite easy to grow regionally. People know you, you can do your story, you can pour a drink, but to grow out of your region is very difficult, both marketing and distribution wise, but also from the perspectives of costs. I have an example a little bit later in my presentation that shows that if you want to export, let's say as a gin producer from England or from Scotland to China, by the time the product hits the shelves there, if you look at pricing, 80% of those costs will be made because of transport, export, import and insurance issues. So how are you going to compete worldwide if you produce locally? And then again, there's distributors. There's a few big ones, The problem is, how do you gain access to them as a small craft distillery? You want a reward, you get some newspaper time, you have your 5 minutes of fame, but will you be picked up by a big distributor? The chances are very small. One of the reasons is there's few of them, and the other reason is they are in bed basically with big alcohol, because big alcohol has an amazing amount of numbers to distribute. We cannot compete with that on an individual and single basis. They have a love affair, we're not invited, so let's change that, guys. How to overcome? I think what we need is a dramatic cut in transport, import, export and insurance costs if we want to be able to actually have our product on the shelf on other countries or in other states or on other continents. And I also think we should have a global reach as craft distillers. Local production, but global reach. And what portfolio distilling is, the name of the network that I'm setting up, is basically the platform to help make that happen. And it basically compares the current production model of an England-based or UK-based distiller that tries to get into the American and the Australian market. It's very difficult to do that, it's very expensive to get your bottles across. What we're doing with portfolio distilling is we're setting up distilleries around the world, basically at least one on every continent. We're templating products of our customers, we're shipping over those templates to the distilleries that work with us together. So now, instead of having to ship over, transport, export, import and insure, you can actually produce locally. And if you don't have distribution, you now also have a local brand ambassador. What we're doing is we're setting up distilleries, portfolio distilleries on each continent, and we're partnering up with a few global suppliers of substrates and of botanicals. So if you want to make the same whiskey in America, you want to make it here in the UK, of course you need access to the same yeast strands, to the same quality water, and especially to the same grains. So we're partnering up with companies that actually provide that and help doing that. And each and every one of these, the suppliers as well as the portfolio distilleries, are approved and certified by us. I mean, we're putting a lot of money in this to help craft distilling grow, and we don't want, how do you say, the rotten potatoes in the bucket, if that's an English expression, if it translates from the Dutch language. You get what I mean, right? Why do we do that? We want to help you produce locally, yet reach out globally. And at the same time, not just presenting a distribution and marketing model, but also a production model that is cheaper, much cheaper, because all of a sudden you do not have to crate and pack and insure and transport your drinks. So if you participate, and this is like an invitation to also think with us about your participation, what we basically do is we have a customer come over to Amsterdam. We have a laboratory where we analyze your drink, and together with your knowledge on how to produce your drink, we'll make a template. We'll actually make an exact copy of it in our laboratory and in our stills. And if you're happy with that recipe, we can start to sell that recipe to other portfolio distillers. So if you want to go to Australia, we now have an Australian center where we can actually produce that same gin, that same rum locally and distribute it in Australia instead of produce it here in the UK and bring it over to Australia. One of the reasons we can do that is because, of course, we invested an enormous amount of money into our mashing, fermenting and distilling equipment, so that it has a total control over not just the alcohol production process, but more importantly, the flavor development process while you produce a certain drink, whether it's gin or whiskey or rum. So what we're doing, basically, if a customer wants his drink distilled in another continent, is that we improve his global reach, and at the same time for the portfolio distiller, let's say in the USA or let's say in Australia, we increase his portfolio. So instead of him just selling his own rum or his own gin, he now has other, mostly award-winning products from other parts of the world that he can actually go to a distributor with and say like, hey, instead of just, you need to sell my gin, I've got the most amazing vodka from Russia, I've got the most amazing rum from you probably, right? Because you're developing a rum, etc., etc. And it's a vice versa, it works both ways. So it opens up markets for your brand, but if you like it, if you're good at it, if you get certified, the question will return. So the guy that makes gin in Australia will probably want you to actually make it over here and help distribute it. So you get a better distribution position in England. You actually get a better position at talking to distributors because you've got a bigger portfolio to share. And not just a bigger portfolio, you also make more money because your stills are running basically the whole time. Now the way we are setting this up is like level. Not everybody wants to be a portfolio distiller. Let's face it, not everybody has an iStill. That doesn't have to be a problem. It should be a distilling network, a distribution network, a production network for basically everybody. So if you have a still and you produce a spirit, you want off-continent or out-of-country production, you can basically do that. We're currently, for a distiller out of Norfolk who found distribution in the USA, setting up USA production. We don't do distribution, he already organized that. We just make sure that his costs are as low as possible, so that his shelf price and his profit margin stay defendable. Second level, maybe you just need, not just need production, but maybe you also need distribution power. Our portfolio distilleries can help out there. Third level, hey, if you're successful with your brands worldwide, maybe you with your distillery actually want to distill some other drinks. And we see that happen as well. So now your still starts to run the whole time because you're making maybe a whiskey from America. And this is not an example, it's actually happening. And maybe you're making a rum from the Caribbean instead of your gin in the UK alone. And the last place is where you also become a portfolio distillery and you start to gain more and more experience in distributing drinks, not just your own, but the ones you're actually producing yourself. You decide if you want to participate, and you decide when and where, on what level you would like to enter and like us to help you out. I'll finish up, and then I hope you have some questions or some additions or some remarks to make. I'll finish up with a few examples that we're currently working on in the portfolio distilling model. We had a producer in Belgium, a producer of gin. He had a 500 liter still and he produced, around 300, 400 bottles of gin per day. He didn't enter the Belgian market. He had a few contacts in China and he was shipping those bottles to China. And with help of portfolio distilling, we now have a distillery in Shanghai and another one in Hong Kong. So the only thing he now does is he designs his gin in Belgium. He uploads the programs with our help to the big stills in China and he produces over there. The cost savings he has are 80%, but more importantly, the 500 liter still, in terms of production and how much bottles he can sell, is basically replaced by two 5,000 liter stills. So from 500 to 10,000 liter of production volume. And he came to me with a question. He said, yeah, I'm not really sure about my Chinese partners. What happens if at night the still is not working and they're making other booze on my stills because they're my stills, right? And I said, really, no issue. We've got all the management information, and in the contract, if you read it, it actually states that if they use the machine for more hours than for your product to be portfolioed, they actually have to pay you an X amount of money per hour. So now he turns around and says, like, actually I like it if they use my stills the whole time and make me money. Second example, there's an Irish distiller that wants to break through in the east coast of the USA. They're doing really good and we're now starting to produce on site in Boston. Boston and Ireland, there seems to be a connection, I'm told. A lot of people with red hair living in that area. A few things that they accomplished. They save around 50% on export, import, transport. But now also, well, you've heard about the whole trade war thing going on and the Europeans putting restrictions on American whiskey and 25% taxes, and who knows, maybe the countermeasure will be that gin will also be more expensive if it's made outside of the USA. So they also negate potential trade war ramifications. I hope I wrote that correctly. Third example, and then it's up to you to have some questions or give me some feedback. An English gin distiller that seeks distribution in the USA, but also a bigger position out of the region that they're from in the UK. We combine them with a New Jersey whiskey producer that is just across the water, I think it's the Hudson, from Manhattan and New York. And he can't get into Manhattan and New York, even though that's the market where he wants to be, because he's just in Jersey, which is a state, and he didn't conquer the whole state, and you're almost not allowed to go out of state before you conquered your own state. His gin is now entering the UK market and the London bar scene. He goes back to Manhattan and says, like, actually I'm already international. All of a sudden, people want to buy his gin in New York as well. And the vice versa for the English distilleries, more work, more hours, more billable hours, and Dergen will be entering the USA market very soon as well. That's basically what I had to share with you guys. Summary? Okay. Thank you. So basically my goal is that with craft distilling really taking off, how can we take away the next hurdles that are there? We do portfolio distilling because we think it may help you.